Over the past decade, governments around the world have won elections on platforms that ignored climate action or were even antagonistic on it. But recent events, think of Australia's Prime Minister as wildfires burned there, or even recent polling here that found that the Conservatives' climate stance hurt them in the last federal election. Is there now a political price to be paid for climate inaction? Let's get into that with Peter Loewen, political science professor at the University of Toronto's Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy. Jessica Green, associate professor of political science at U of T and cross-appointed to its School of Environment. And Mark Toohey, editor-in-chief, Sun News, and host of the modestly called Best Show Ever on Toronto radio station News Talk 1010. And it is great to have you two on the ends back here. And you here, I think, for the first time, yes? Yeah, yep. Lovely to have you here. Okay, let us set up this conversation by reading just a few of the following. And Sheldon, I'll ask you to bring these graphics up and I'll read them out loud for those listening on podcast. Australia is a burning nation led by cowards. So wrote Australian broadcaster Hugh Rimmington in November. In the New York Times, the Australian novelist Richard Flanagan wrote this in early January about the government's inaction on climate change. He wrote, "Such are those who would open the gates of hell and lead a nation to commit climate suicide." The situation is eerily reminiscent of the Soviet Union in the 1980s, when the ruling apparatchiks were all-powerful, but losing the fundamental moral legitimacy to govern. In Australia today, a political establishment grown sclerotic and demented on its own fantasies is facing a monstrous reality which it has neither the ability nor the will to confront. Okay, let's follow that up with some numbers. From The Guardian, a poll from late November found that 60% of Australians want to see more climate action, compared with just 51% as recently as last March. How about in Canada? Here's some local data. An Abacus data poll before last October's federal election found 82% of respondents said climate change is a serious problem. 72% supported the idea of a Green New Deal. Those numbers are up a lot. In Britain, a poll in August found 85% of Britons are now concerned about climate change, with the majority, 52%, very concerned. This was a record level of concern for the polling firm Ipsos Mori since it began tracking back in 2005. And let's do one more. According to Pew Research, the share of Americans calling global climate change a major threat to the well-being of the United States has grown from 40% back in 2013 to 57% last year. These numbers are clearly all going in one direction. Jessica, let's get you started right away. We know the environmental price around climate change. Can we now state unambiguously that there is a political price to be paid for ignoring climate change?
Yes, well, I think there are a number of political prices. The first and foremost, we know that climate change affects disproportionately those who are poor, both internationally and within nations. And so there is a political price that these people have to pay. They're losing jobs, they're losing homes, their way of life is becoming more expensive. And so I think absolutely that political price is starting to ratchet up over time. And as it becomes more pronounced, we're going to see more and more sort of demands for climate policy and more pushback against this kind of climate denialism that we've seen in Australia, for example, in the over the last month.
Peter, in your view, is there now a political price to be paid for lacking a coherent policy on climate change?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is. I mean, there's two reasons why. One is that it's increasingly an important issue for voters, and the second is that there's not politically a consensus over how to deal with it, so it becomes a point of debate. And I think the last Canadian election was a great example of a case where the climate goes up as one of the most important issues. It's one of the first time I've ever seen it being a top one or two issue over and over again in voters' minds. And there was differences between the parties in terms of how much emphasis they were putting on it and how credible they were on those issues. You get those two factors, importance and difference between parties, it's going to become a big political issue. So in the Canadian case, I think that the numbers are pretty clear. We worked on some data from the Canadian election study that suggested, for about 6% of voters, climate was really the pivotal issue for them. That may not sound like a lot. It doesn't sound like, but if you kind of work through the econometrics of it, if you do the analysis, it turns out something like 8% of constituencies probably would have had a different outcome if the environment had been a level issue between the parties. It wasn't. It was an issue to the advantage of the Liberal Party. The Conservative Party paid the cost for that.
Well, let me go to a very proud Conservative sitting at this table right now and ask, Mark, is there any question in your mind but that the Conservative Party lost the last election in significant part because too many Canadians didn't think they had a coherent position on climate change?
No, I don't think that played into it at all, to be honest. I think, and I don't think there is yet a political price to be paid for not having a coherent policy on climate change, because I don't think there's a party in Canada that had a coherent policy on climate change. The Liberals are smoke and rope with what they've put out there. Everybody, even their own people, say it won't work. The Conservatives absolutely had none, and they didn't get any points for that, but I don't think they lost a lot of points for that. I think there were many other factors that cost them the election. The only parties that had a somewhat reasonably sort of acceptable to the Green experts policy on climate change was probably the Green Party, but that would have bankrupted Canada. You cited the Abacus data, which is for the first time, very highly aware. It suggests that Canadians are about climate change, 82%. But the only issue that was higher than that, you didn't have up there, which is affordability. And I think that's the rub, is we have to find a way, and politicians have to figure out a way so that those poor people who are most disadvantaged by climate change aren't also wiped out by the fix. And when you look at economic measures like carbon taxes, cap and trade, that inevitably raises prices. Well, that's great if you're going to save the planet 50 years from now or 20 years from now. But if that means I can't feed my kids next week because I can't afford the food they need or the transportation or my job to get to my job, that's a problem. And that's where I think political parties need to suck back. They all need to reload and come up with some kind of a solution that actually will make some difference, that people believe will make a difference, but that also isn't going to, cut off your arms so you can afford to buy gloves.
I have to tell you, that's a very unconventional position you've just taken. Doesn't make you wrong, but it's unconventional. Do you want to go at him on it?
No, I don't want to go at him. I think I agree. I think I want to make a couple of points. One, I think it's important to say people are very concerned about climate change, but in Canada, only about half the people who are concerned about climate change think that it's caused by human activity, right? So this is a very important political implication for what we do policy-wise, right? Is this just, sunspots or natural variation, or is this something about our actual behavior? And so we have to keep that in mind when we think about these policy solutions. I agree with Mark. I agree with Mark in the sense that we cannot have solutions that disproportionately penalize working class folks and poor folks who are already struggling with much more immediate problems. And I've actually gone on record saying that I don't think carbon pricing is a good idea because I think we're fighting over something that has basically a marginal effect, and depending on how it's designed, can also make life more expensive for people who can least afford it. Now, it doesn't have to be that way, right? It can be designed in a much more progressive way, in which basically it becomes more of a wealth tax, right? If you consume over a certain amount, then you pay a lot more, but that, again, that all depends on the design.
Your view is clearly the more conventional view in the country, which is that the lack of a coherent climate policy did adversely affect the Conservative Party at the ballot box. Mark Toohey is not convinced. You want to try to convince him?
Well, I want to agree with Mark on one thing. The total global coherency of environmental policy in Canada is yet to be established. Let's put it that way. So economists who have one view on this tend to agree that carbon taxes are a good way to address climate change because they think that putting a price on everything is a good way of dealing with it. I happen to agree with that, right? It turns out, though, that it's actually hard to find an economist who thinks that the current price on carbon is enough to have a big noticeable effect.
Right.
So it's a bit like saying, well, the evidence is that you have to have chemotherapy to deal with cancer, and let me give you a minuscule amount to deal with your cancer. Well, that's not actually evidence-based.
Not going to get it done.
So I think for this government, to be fair to them, it was a lot of political capital that had to be expended to get this price on carbon, to try to get a floor price across the country. It's a difficult thing to do politically. But one of the compromises they made was to bring it in at a low enough level that it wasn't really going to bite. And to the degree that it bit, they were going to give back some refunds and hope that worked itself out politically. That's not a plan for let's say, aggressive action on climate. They're going to say it's a first step. It has to be proven whether it's a bigger step or a coherent plan, as you might say. I think for the Conservative Party, the issue is that voters don't feel that they're credible on the environment. So, politics is about perception, not about reality. In particular, on policy things, it's about whether people think the policies are going to work, not whether they do work. And people tended to think the Liberal Party has a more robust commitment to action on climate change than the Conservative Party did. And elections have multiple factors that come in. There's all sorts of things that influence voters. But the environment was one of those issues where if the Conservative Party had done better, had had what voters perceived as being a more credible plan, they would have done better electorally. Now, maybe other issues would have come in at that point because politics is strategic, but my own reading of the data is that they paid a pretty significant price for not being a leading voice, not being a credible voice on climate.
Well, let's try this. Your position notwithstanding, do you think going forward that the Conservative Party stands a better chance of winning an election if it has something more coherent to say about climate change?
If that election was held now, yes, absolutely. But there's so many issues that could arise between now and an election day that would trump this. But I think affordability is still, in the minds of Canadians, the biggest problem. We can talk about a country that has an economy that's doing very well, but the average person isn't seeing that, right? And so every solution that's being offered for every problem, whether it's climate change or transportation or congestion or whatever, they all cost people more money. And there just isn't more money. And so until you can deal with that, people aren't, when it comes down to putting an X in a box, there is a large cohort of Canadians that are not going to vote to pay more money because they don't have it.
There may not be more money from the people that you are representing, but there may be...
I represent maybe the readers of the Sun.
Well, okay, and they may be emblematic of the kind of socioeconomic background you're talking about right now. But I'm betting you and your acolyte Bernie Sanders, whom I know you love, think there's a lot more money to be had out there to tackle climate change. It's held among corporations who are hoarding it and sitting on dead money and not doing anything with it and that kind of thing.
But they get their money from the poor people.
Okay, so a couple things going on here. First of all, I'm not a spokesperson for Bernie Sanders in any way, shape, or form. I want to be clear about that.
But you like him.
Yeah, I do like him. I think there's another important thing to be said here, which goes back to Peter's point about perception and reality. We're contrasting the liberal versus the conservative view on climate change. The liberal plan on climate change, the liberal plan isn't that hot. We're still 70 plus megatons short of our very mediocre plan at the Paris Agreement, right? So, the liberals may have a more sort of persuasive persona about this, but in terms of actually tackling climate change and avoiding the most serious effects, we're a very far cry from getting there. So I think that's the first important point to make. The second point about affordability is, there's this traditional bifurcation that we always say, oh, well, it's jobs versus the environment. It's pay more for this or pay more for that. And I think one of the real problems is both on the liberal and the conservative sides is like, we need to think about how to reframe climate change not as a question that or an issue that's in contradistinction to affordability, but something that goes together with it, right? So it's not, a lot of what we think of as climate policy is not really climate policy. It's about urban planning and, zoning and density requirements and investments in infrastructure, right? So if we want to get serious about thinking about how to actually solve this problem instead of fighting about the politics about it, then we have to sort of abandon this this bifurcation, and think about, well, what are the policies that are going to both address climate change and build lasting political constituencies through things like enhancing affordability for Canadians, right? And I think that's not rocket science. We just need to stop arguing about whether it tastes great or it's less filling, right? And actually think about the nuts and bolts of this. And there are a lot of people who are doing that.
That is a line from a beer commercial that is going to go over the heads of anybody who's under the age of 50. But
Sorry.
I get what you meant. Did you get that reference? Because you're under 50.
I did.
You got it anyway. Okay. Well, let me take you back. I want to take you back to the middle of the first decade of the 21st century. Al Gore was getting an Oscar for An Inconvenient Truth. Stéphane Dion was the leader of the Liberal Party, and he was running on something called the Green Shift, which, while unsuccessful electorally, certainly was, a significant conversation piece during that election campaign. And then came the Great Recession of 2008, and the environment essentially disappeared as a key issue for Canadians as they dealt with all of the ravages of the Great Recession. I wonder whether you are similarly concerned that even though all those numbers we gave off the top, which suggest that we are finally very attuned to environmental issues, could all disappear if we have a recession later this year.
Yeah, I think it's very. It speaks to the fragility of the issue, that the degree to which people are concerned about it depends on things like weather events or or things like forest fires burning or bushfires burning in Australia, that it has to be top of mind for people to think that it's an important issue, and it's so easily kicked off the agenda by economic concerns. It's not the case with healthcare, right? Healthcare remains on that. People's concerns about education remains there. So this is the political challenge, and Jessica's right that I think the challenge for politicians and for those in public policy is, how do you bring in policies that rather than people feeling like they cost them, actually build more support for it, right? And build increasing constituencies for things, and that's something that we're not good at. I think one of the fundamental things here is that voters are increasingly of the mind, and we have data that shows this pretty clearly. Voters are increasingly of the mind that government's just not good at doing big things. So if government says, we're going to build a transit system across Toronto that's going to get people from Etobicoke to downtown, or from Rexdale to downtown quickly and easily, so they don't have to get in their car, as easily as somebody who lives in High Park or Yonge and Eglinton, people don't believe it. They just don't think it can get done. So when there are grander plans put on the table about what government can do to really rethink the way we build cities, or to rethink how our economy is structured, voters, rightly or wrongly, look at that and say, that sounds nice, but I just don't think you can deliver on it. And that's the challenge, right? About coming up with things that actually work, that are small and medium term, and then that lead to support for longer term things. So we can't, I think, just in sum, I don't think that people who really want to move on climate can hope that these episodic things like bushfires are going to be enough to keep people's concern up, extreme weather to build support. They've actually got to find the public policy tools to put stuff in place that's going to continue to build support for increased action.
Is part of your natural skepticism about what government is able to or unable to do, is that part of your explanation why you don't necessarily trust government to lead the way on climate change?
Well, I think government plays a critical role, but I think the average Canadian doesn't believe government gets anything done well. And I think most Canadians don't believe anything that's a tax is going to benefit them in any way. And they don't trust that there's going to be a rebate. They don't trust that the amount they get back is going to be equivalent. And the structure of the carbon tax backstop in Ontario that they've fallen into doesn't really make a lot of sense. It's not enough money, but it's a punitive action. It's going to cost people. I think you could do. I think if the Conservatives were smart, they would propose a carbon tax. And I'm not sure that's the solution, but I think that's the ante to get table stakes, to get into the game. And I think you could. If you told me that you're going to take away the harmonized sales tax and instead tax me based on the carbon that I consume, that would provide an incentive to my behavior to look for a low carbon alternative without costing me more money.
That's a green shift. That's what Dion ran out
Absolutely.
and was rejected
but he wore
overwhelmingly.
a silly hat. And what we know from Monty Python is that if you wear silly hats, you will not be prime minister.
Well, but to be sure, the other bit with Dion's plan was we're going to take all this money through the carbon tax, and these are all the programs that we're going to fund. And for those voters who've got a skepticism about the ability of government to deliver programs, what they're hearing is you're going to take that money and just spend it.
Yeah. Government shouldn't deliver any programs. Just the pricing mechanism itself. Well, not any programs. But to take money for carbon and put it on, we're going to pick the winners, is fool's game, and no one will believe that you'll pick that right. But if you were to tell me that every dollar that I put into the carbon tax comes off my HST bill,
that gets your attention.
And you actually did that at the same time, then I think that might be a winner for small C Conservatives across the country. And I don't know where the others would fall, but I think it would be opening the door to agreeing that something should be done. But don't give the government that money to spend on programs. Let them run the government.
Actually, I know of polling in the States. I don't know if you know of equivalent numbers in Canada, but actually the public does support investment in public goods. So take that money and invest it into clean energy, invest it into transportation. There is a lot of support for that as well. So,
you know what? Can I take advantage of having you here by reading something that you wrote?
Absolutely.
You did this in Jacobin magazine. It was under the headline, "It's Time to Abandon Carbon Pricing," which is an unusual thing for an environmentalist to be writing, but here we go. Here are your thoughts. In environmental terms, carbon pricing has produced marginal climate benefits in the form of gradual emissions reductions. But politically, it's done more harm than good. Carbon pricing has contributed to the extreme polarization of the climate issue. It's stoked class divisions, reinforced the myth that climate policy necessarily penalizes the poor and working class, and sparking revolts like the Yellow Vests in France. That myth, in turn, has slowed progress on decarbonization, all while convincing politicians and the public that we're making real headway on climate change. We're not, you say. Okay, that's Jessica Green. You agree with that?
I think there's a lot to be said for that. I mean, if you look at the projected emissions under the Liberals' climate change plan and the projected emissions under the Conservatives' climate change plan, and you take that margin between those two, it's not very big, right? Now, we're going to save the planet through a bunch of small actions adding up to big ones, but I think it's fair if a person looks at that and says, I don't see a huge difference between those in any global sense. The issue with the carbon tax in Canada, from my own reading of it, is that the government paid a big cost to do it, but didn't pay a big cost to put a big price on carbon. I mean, there is a bit of political theater in this issue, right? In that conservative politicians will say it's going to be a tax on everything, it's going to have incredible costs on your food, and you're going to feel it all the way down the line. And the Liberals are saying, you're not actually going to feel it, we're going to rebate it. Well, in reality, it's actually not that big of a tax for anybody, right? So I don't think it's big enough to have a huge effect actually on behavior, and I don't think it's big enough to really feel the bite on it. I mean, the amount for example, that it accounts for in terms of a liter of gasoline is smaller than the fluctuation you'll see over a 2-month period in gas prices.
So an enormous political experture of their currency
It's
without
a
much
tempest in
paying.
a teacup.
Right,
Tempest in a
and
teacup.
not big enough to actually bite. Now, so that's where the theater is in it a little bit.
But it works both ways, and I think you're right. Every little penny that you add to my bill comes out of my wallet, and I'm not getting paid more. So I didn't have any extra pennies in my wallet when I walked in here. And so if you're going to take 3 more out now, then I got to figure out what I'm not getting that I used to have. But the Conservatives have to learn the same thing applies. And this fiction and this fool's sort of rhetoric that because Canada's carbon emissions amount to 1 point something or 0 point something percent, there's no point trying. Well, that's hogwash for the same reason that the tax argument is hogwash. Oh, you won't miss it. Yes, you will miss it. And yes, we're not going to find one huge answer to any major problem. There's a bunch of little ones. And that, just because it's not going to fix the world doesn't mean we don't need to look at every opportunity. And the Conservatives need to get over that.
But I am interested in the fact that I suspect if we were having this conversation here 2 years ago, you, Mark Toohey, would not be coming out and saying, you know what, I'm open to a carbon tax as long as I see a reduction in the HST at the same time. I think political events have had an impact on your thinking on that.
I think if I was thinking for myself, there wouldn't have been a difference. If 2 years ago I was here representing somebody else, then I would have preached that party line. But that's a conservative approach. I mean, if you take away one tax and you replace it with another, that makes sense. That's market forces. Like whether it works or not, I don't know. But if you price something more expensive, people consume less of it, right? We know that from just supply and demand. I don't know that it's the solution because I'm not an expert in that. But from a purely small c conservative perspective, if you wanted to punish me for using carbon and reward me for not using carbon, I'm okay for that as long as I'm net.
You have a very quizzical look on your face right now.
No. I mean, I agree with. I just don't think that punishment is not a good political sale, right? I mean, that's one of the main arguments here,
Which is
right?
why you oppose a
Which
carbon
is why
tax.
I think it's I laud the Liberals for trying to make that sale, right? But I think it's backfired because they have expended a huge amount of political capital for very little, in terms of emissions reductions to show for it, when instead we could be talking about things that make people a little bit less upset, like making public transportation run better and be more affordable, right? Which is something I think a lot of people could get behind, right? Which would also go a far way towards reducing emissions. So,
But we are where we are. And the country has just been through a rather enormous debate over the last 4 years that the Liberals have been in. And there is in some cases, a grudging acceptance that the carbon tax is here to stay, notwithstanding some some court challenges that a few provinces are leading. So given that we are where we are, Do you really want to reverse the carbon tax right now? You want to get rid of it?
Well, I mean, I guess it's fine if it stays, but I just don't think that's what we need to be talking about right now. So, the Conservatives are wasting a huge amount of resources fighting this, in court. Like, why? Because, they're going to lose. They've already lost.
Lost once round already, yeah.
So, I think we need to, I guess I wouldn't, if you push me on it, I guess I say I wouldn't repeal what's happening now, but I don't think that we need to expend any political energy whatsoever on it. And the Liberals have to do this, right? Because first they said they were going to up the price $5 a year in perpetuity, and then they walked back on that. So, there's going to be, just because it's already in place doesn't mean it's set, right? It's still going to be a political football going forward. And my suggestion is we just dodge that political football and focus on something else.
Well, I wonder if this is something else you want us to focus on. You have written about the shift towards existential politics. What's that a reference to?
So the argument here is basically that, and this goes back to the discussion before about whether we can sustain climate on the national agenda, or if it's just a sort of, the latest tragedy of the day. Well, as those tragedies become more frequent, which all the science suggests that they will be, then there are going to be more people losing their shirts. And that is essentially the existential politics of climate change. As more people lose their shirts through a variety of either extreme weather events, floods, efforts to decarbonize, they may lose their jobs, right? This is going to activate political interest groups. People are going to start getting more and more upset, right? And they're going to lobby for protections from government and elsewhere.
The difficulty, Peter, though, seems to be people want action on climate change. They don't like what they're seeing in terms of the world falling apart in that regard. I'm not sure they're prepared to change their lifestyles as dramatically as what would be required in order to do that. How do you get around that conundrum?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's a very difficult question. I mean, it's the nature of humans, right? That we want things, but we don't want to pay for them. So for politicians, you've got to find all the things you can do that people aren't going to really notice. And it might be that you've got to do some really big things, right? And I think, there are.
You notice big things, though.
Yeah. So the way you've got to think about it are what are the big levers that you can pull on, right? And governments control transportation systems. They control roads and the pricing or the non-pricing on roads. You probably have a big lever there to pull on if you can do it, right? It's very hard to do it politically. We've seen it not done in our province a couple of times in the last few years. Air travel's a huge piece, and the supply of food are huge pieces. So you have to figure out how to set up either policies or pricing mechanisms on those. But I'm only saying that what you've said, which is that it's hard to get people to do it.
Mm-hmm. But that's where the consumer's already at, the existential argument. Because the consumer's looking at whether I lose my house because it gets washed away in a once-in-a-millennium flood that happens now every 6 months, or whether I lose my house because I can't afford it anymore, I still lose my house. Those things are equal. And so when you're arguing we have to raise the prices or lose jobs in order to prevent your house from floating down the river, that's not a win for the person who loses his house because he lost his job.
Well, but I think that's an important point, right? We talk about, you've talked a lot about how much more climate change is going to, these climate policies are going to cost. Well, climate inaction is going to cost even more, right? We know that if we don't do anything.
Yeah, but that's tomorrow. When my house is on fire, I'm not worried about what caused it. I'm not worried about the neighbor's house. I'm worried about getting my kids out of the fire, right? And so the average person in this country is worried about how they're going to, what they're going to have for dinner tonight and getting the kids up and to school in the morning. They don't have the luxury, even at whatever pay scale they're at and whatever education level they're at, they're busy living today. They don't have savings. They don't have the time to read a newspaper. They don't have time to do all of this kind of stuff. We have the luxury of doing that, but we have to remember that most Canadians don't. They're busy. And so we need to be smarter than that. We need to come up with a solution that doesn't destroy their present in order to save a future that they won't be around to enjoy.
Is that doable, Mark?
I don't know. But I think that there are some things that are verboten to talk about. Nuclear power. I think that I don't know much about it. That's got to be part of the solution. The biggest single element that Ontario did to lower its emission rates was done by the former Liberal government, which was to get out of the coal business. Then they screwed up a lot of things after that and invested heavily on this desire to make green technology something that it wasn't. And we can argue that, and I don't, but that was a good move. Can we get off of more fossil fuels and into nuclear? I don't know. But we got to think that way, not just sort of beating people on the stick.
You want the last word on this?
Well, you can't get something for nothing, right? So, I mean, and I think Peter's right. You got to think of what the biggest levers are, and one of them is subsidies, right? We spend a huge amount of time, even as we're trying to price carbon, subsidizing the fossil fuel industry. That's money that we're just, lighting on fire in terms of our climate policy. So that's one way to get some leverage. And the other one, the reality is, there was this question of where's the money going to come from? Well, we need to redistribute some of the wealth in this country to make sure that people can actually, worry a little bit more about tomorrow and not just about today.
This is why this is such a confusing topic, because Mark Toohey, well-known conservative, has now come out for the carbon tax and thinks Stéphane Dion was...
not the carbon tax, but
a
potentially
carbon tax.
a carbon tax.
As long as it's offset. And you're against a carbon tax. I'm very confused right now. My head's hurting. But that won't stop me from thanking Peter Loewen from the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy for coming to TVO tonight, along with Jessica Green, his colleague at the U of T, cross-appointed to the School of Environment, and Mark Toohey, editor-in-chief, Sun News, and host of the, I love this name, the best show ever on News Talk 1010 Radio. Grateful to all of you for coming into TVO tonight. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Steve.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.